The orc woman stood at the edge of Quinlan Ashford's wheat field with blood still fresh on her armor, and her breath coming in ragged gasps that fogged the cold autumn air. She had killed 3 men that morning, bandits who had been tracking her for days through the wilderness, and now she had nowhere left to run except into the lands of humans, who would sooner hang her than offer shelter. Quinlan looked up from the fence post he was mending, his calloused hands going still on the weathered wood as he took in the sight of her. 7 feet of exhausted warrior with skin the color of spring moss, small tusks jutting from her lower jaw, and eyes that held more wariness than threat, despite the massive sword strapped to her back. "I mean no harm," she said, her voice rougher than she intended, shaped by a throat not made for the common tongue. "I only ask to pass through your land unmolested." Quinlan set down his hammer slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and unthreatening. He was a man of 30 winters with sun-darkened skin and dark hair that curled at his collar, broad-shouldered from years of farm work, but with a gentle cast to his weathered face. "You are bleeding," he observed, nodding toward the gash on her arm where leather had torn and green flesh showed through, seeping darker blood. She glanced down as if only now remembering the wound. "It is nothing. It will fester if untreated." He straightened, dusting his hands on his work trousers. "I have supplies in the house. Let me tend it." Her pointed ears flattened slightly against her skull, a sign of confusion or suspicion. "Why would you help me? I am orc. I can see that." Quinlan's mouth quirked in something not quite a smile. "But you are also injured and tired, and I was raised to offer aid when I could. The question is whether you will accept it." She studied him for a long moment, weighing trust against necessity. The wound did hurt, a hot throb that pulsed with each heartbeat, and she had been running for so long that her legs trembled beneath her. "Very well," she said finally, "but I will not be indebted. I am Farrah Algrun, shield maiden of the Broken Tusk clan, and I offer my sword in payment for your kindness." Quinlan's expression shifted to something more thoughtful as he gestured toward the modest farmhouse that sat amid the golden fields. "I would rather have you at my table," he said simply. "Come, let me fix that arm, and then we can talk about what brought you here." The words struck her like a physical blow, unexpected and disarming. No human had ever spoken to her with such casual welcome, as if her presence was not a contamination but merely a guest to be hosted. Farrah found herself following him across the field, her boots crunching on the stubble of harvested grain, her warrior instincts screaming that this was a trap even as something deeper in her chest, loosened with desperate hope. The farmhouse was small but well kept, with clay-chinked walls and a roof of good thatch that would keep out the coming winter. Inside, it smelled of wood smoke and dried herbs, with a large hearth dominating one wall and a simple table with 4 chairs set near it. Quinlan moved with practiced efficiency, stoking the fire and setting a kettle to boil before gathering clean cloth and a small clay jar from a shelf. "Sit," he instructed, pulling out one of the chairs. Farrah hesitated, then unbuckled her sword belt and leaned the massive blade against the wall before lowering herself into the chair. It creaked under her weight, but held. She watched as Quinlan worked, his hands gentle as he cleaned the wound with water that smelled of lavender, then applied a salve that stung but immediately eased the deeper ache. "You have skill at this," she observed. "My mother was a healer. She made sure I learned the basics before she passed." He wrapped the wound with clean linen, his fingers deft at the knots. "There. That should hold until it begins to close on its own." "You mentioned your table," Farrah said, her voice carefully neutral. "What did you mean by that?" Quinlan settled into the chair across from her, studying her face with an intensity that made her want to look away. "I meant exactly what I said. I have no need of a sword arm. The wars ended before I was old enough to fight in them, and the bandits rarely come this far into settled lands. But I do get lonely out here, and it has been a long time since I shared a meal with anyone but myself. If you need a place to rest and recover, you are welcome to it. No debts, no service required, just company if you are willing to give it. She should have refused. Every instinct honed by years of living on the margins of both orc and human society told her that accepting this offer would lead to pain. Humans did not simply welcome orcs into their homes out of kindness. There would be a price, always a price, whether spoken or unspoken. And yet she found herself nodding, the exhaustion of too many sleepless nights finally catching up to her. "For a few days only," she said, "until I am fit to travel again. As you wish." Quinlan rose and moved to the hearth, ladling thick stew from a pot that had been simmering there into 2 wooden bowls. He set one before her with a hunk of dark bread and a cup of water. "Eat. You look half-starved." The food was simple but well made, rich with root vegetables and herbs and small pieces of salted pork. Farrah ate slowly at first, watching for any sign of treachery, but Quinlan simply consumed his own meal in comfortable silence, occasionally glancing at her but making no demands for conversation. Gradually she allowed herself to relax, just a fraction, and when the bowl was empty she felt more human than she had in weeks. More herself. "Why are you running?" Quinlan asked eventually, when both their bowls sat empty and the afternoon light slanted golden through the small windows. Farrah traced the rim of her cup with one thick finger, considering how much truth to offer. "My clan chief wanted to use me," she said finally, "as a weapon against a rival clan. He would have had me assassinate their leader under flag of truce, a dishonorable act that would have broken every code I swore to uphold. When I refused, he declared me oathbreaker and sent warriors to retrieve me. I fled rather than submit. So you kept your honor at the cost of your home." "Yes." The word came out more bitter than she intended, though I wonder now if honor is worth the price of having nowhere to belong. Quinlan leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking softly. "My father always said that a man who compromises his principles for comfort will eventually have neither. I suspect the same holds true for orc women." She met his gaze, searching for mockery or judgment, but found only a quiet understanding that settled something anxious in her chest. "You are strange for a human," she said, "so I have been told." He smiled then, a real smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "But then, I imagine you are strange for an orc, or you would not have chosen exile over obedience." They talked until the sun set, and the room filled with the warm glow of firelight. Quinlan spoke of his farm, of the rhythms of planting and harvest, of the satisfaction of coaxing life from the earth. Farrah found herself sharing stories of her training, of the weapons forms she had mastered, and the campaigns she had fought in when her clan had warred with goblins in the northern hills. It was easier than she expected, this exchange of words with a stranger who asked for nothing but her presence. When full dark had fallen, Quinlan showed her to a small storage room he had cleared out, providing her with blankets and a straw pallet that was cleaner than anything she had slept on in weeks. "I will be in the loft if you need anything," he said. "Rest well, Farrah." She watched him climb the ladder to the sleeping space above, then stretched out on the pallet with her sword within easy reach. Despite her caution, sleep claimed her almost immediately, deep and dreamless and undisturbed for the first time since she had fled her clan. The morning came with the smell of porridge and the sound of Quinlan moving about the kitchen. Farrah emerged from her room to find him setting out bowls and honey, his hair still damp from washing at the pump outside. "I thought you might be hungry," he said by way of greeting. They ate together again, and afterward Farrah insisted on helping with the farm work despite Quinlan's protests that she was meant to be resting. He finally relented, and she spent the day helping him repair fences and clear the irrigation ditches that fed his fields. The work was hard but satisfying, using her strength for creation rather than destruction, and she found herself enjoying the simple pleasure of accomplishment. That evening they sat by the fire again, and Quinlan produced a wooden board carved with squares and a collection of painted stones. "Do you know crowns and castles?" he asked. "No." Farrah tilted her head, studying the board with interest. "Then let me teach you." He set up the pieces, explaining the rules with patience, and soon they were locked in a game that required more strategy than she had anticipated. She lost the first match badly, but demanded a rematch and managed to put up a better fight. Quinlan's laughter when she made a particularly clever move was warm and genuine, and she found herself smiling in return, an expression that felt foreign on her face after so long. The days began to follow a pattern. They would wake with the dawn, share breakfast, work the farm together through the day, and spend the evenings in conversation or games by the fire. Farrah's wound healed cleanly, and her strength returned, but she found herself reluctant to mention leaving. Quinlan never asked when she planned to go, never made her feel unwelcome, and so she stayed. She learned that he had inherited the farm from his parents 5 years prior, after a fever had taken them both within days of each other. He had a sister who had married and moved to a village 3 days' ride to the south, but otherwise he lived alone, working land that had been in his family for 3 generations. He spoke of his parents with love and loss in equal measure, and Farrah found herself sharing memories of her own mother, an orc woman who had taught her daughter to wield a blade but also to value mercy. "She would have liked you," Farrah said one evening, surprising herself with the admission. "She always said that strength without kindness was just brutality wearing a different name." "She sounds wise," Quinlan replied. "I wish I could have met her. She died in the Goblin Wars, took an arrow meant for another warrior." Farrah stared into the fire, remembering. "She said it was a good death, but I have never thought any death in battle could be truly good, just necessary sometimes." Quinlan reached across the table and touched her hand briefly, a gesture of comfort that sent an unexpected warmth through her. "I am sorry," he said simply. They sat in silence for a time, the fire crackling between them, and Farrah realized that this was the most at peace she had felt since her mother's death. Here in this small farmhouse with this strange, kind human man, she had found something she had not even known she was searching for. The thought terrified her. The first frost came 2 weeks after her arrival, coating the fields in a sparkling blanket of white that crunched under their boots. Quinlan took her to the root cellar to check the stores of vegetables they had harvested, and she was impressed by the quantity and organization. He had clearly been preparing for a hard winter. "You could feed an army with what you have stored," she observed, examining the rows of turnips and potatoes and onions. "Or one very large orc woman," he teased, and she shoved him lightly, careful not to use her full strength. "I am not that large." "You are magnificent," he said, and then seemed to realize what he had admitted, because he turned away quickly and busied himself counting sacks of grain. Farrah stood very still, her heart doing something complicated in her chest. Magnificent. No one had ever called her that before. Fearsome, yes. Dangerous. Brutal. But magnificent was something else entirely, something that suggested beauty and worth beyond her capacity for violence. She wanted to say something in return, to acknowledge the gift of that word, but her throat had closed up, and so she simply followed him back up into the cold air. That night she lay awake in her room, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the way Quinlan's face had looked in the cellar, the genuine admiration in his voice. She was not foolish enough to mistake his kindness for attraction. Humans and orcs did not form that kind of bond. The prejudice ran too deep, the physical differences too vast. He had offered her shelter and friendship, and she should be grateful for that rather than yearning for something impossible. But her heart, it seemed, had not received that message. The realization that she was falling in love with Quinlan Ashford hit her like a warhammer to the chest. She sat up in bed, pressing her hands to her face, and tried to reason herself out of the feeling. It was gratitude, nothing more. The natural attachment that formed when someone showed you unexpected kindness. It would pass once she left, once she put distance between herself and this place that had begun to feel dangerously like home. Except she did not want it to pass. That was the terrible, impossible truth. She wanted to stay here, in this small farmhouse with its neat fields and warm fires. She wanted to spend her evenings playing games and sharing stories. She wanted to wake up each morning knowing that Quinlan would be there, solid and kind and unfailingly patient with her rough edges. She wanted things she had no right to want. The next morning she was quieter than usual, and Quinlan noticed immediately. "Are you feeling well?" he asked over breakfast. "Is your arm troubling you?" "I am fine." She forced herself to meet his concerned gaze. "I have been thinking that I should move on soon. I have imposed on your hospitality long enough." Something flickered across his face, too quick for her to identify. "You have not imposed," he said carefully, "but I understand if you feel the need to continue your journey. Where will you go?" "North, perhaps, into the mountains. There are stories of orc communities there that live apart from the clans that take in exiles." She pushed her porridge around the bowl without eating. "I cannot stay here forever. Eventually someone will see me and there will be questions you cannot answer." "Let me worry about that." Quinlan set down his spoon. "Farrah, I need to tell you something." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Yes. I have enjoyed these past weeks more than I can properly express. This farm, it is a good life, but it is a lonely one. Having you here has reminded me what it is like to have someone to share things with, to have a friend." He paused, seeming to struggle with his words. "If you truly wish to leave, I will not stop you. But if you are leaving because you think you are unwelcome or unwanted, then I am doing a poor job of making my feelings clear. I would be honored if you stayed, not as a guest, but as a partner. This farm is more than I can manage alone, and you have proven yourself invaluable in the work. We could make it official, a proper arrangement. You want me to work for you?" She could not keep the disappointment from her voice. "No." He reached across the table and took her hand, his fingers warm and rough against her own. "I want you to share this life with me, as an equal. The farm would be as much yours as mine. I know it is not what you are accustomed to, and I know there would be challenges with the neighbors, but I think we could make it work if you were willing to try." She stared at their joined hands, her mind racing. He was offering her a home, a place to belong, but he spoke of it in terms of partnership and practicality rather than the feelings that were tearing her apart inside. It was more than she had any right to expect, and yet it felt like less than she desperately wanted. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Why would you take such a risk for me?" Quinlan was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke his voice was rough with emotion. "Because in the short time I have known you, you have become important to me. Because I admire your strength and your honor and the way you laugh when you finally master a new strategy in crowns and castles. Because I wake up in the morning, and the first thing I think about is what we might talk about that day. Because this house feels less empty when you are in it, and the thought of you leaving makes me understand what my father meant when he said loneliness was not about being alone, but about being without the person who made you feel whole." Her breath caught. "Quinlan, I know I am asking for something difficult," he continued, the words tumbling out now as if he had been holding them back for too long. "I know that staying here means risking discovery, means facing prejudice and hatred from people who will not understand. I know I am human and you are orc, and that the world says those two things cannot mix. But I am asking anyway because I cannot bear the thought of not asking. Stay, Farrah, please." She should say no. The wise thing, the safe thing, would be to leave now before her heart became any more entangled with his. But wisdom had never been her strong suit, and safety had stopped mattering the moment she had walked away from her clan. So instead, she tightened her grip on his hand and said, "I will stay." The smile that broke across Quinlan's face was brighter than the sunrise, and Farrah felt an answering warmth spread through her chest. They sat there for a long moment, hands clasped across the table, and she thought that perhaps impossible things happened more often than she had believed. The practical arrangements took shape over the following days. They expanded the storage room to make it a proper bedroom for Farrah, with a reinforced bed frame that could support her weight and a chest for the few possessions she had. Quinlan insisted on paying her a share of the farm's profits, which Farrah initially refused until he pointed out that he would need to hire help otherwise, and she might as well benefit from her own labor. Besides, he added with that gentle smile she had come to treasure, partners share equally. That includes the burdens and the rewards. They fell into new rhythms, working side by side with an efficiency that came from growing understanding. Farrah's strength made many tasks easier, and she took fierce pride in the improvements they made together. They fortified the barn against the coming winter, repaired the plow, and began planning for the spring planting. In the evenings, they continued their games and conversations, but now there was an additional layer of comfort, the knowledge that this was not temporary but the beginning of something lasting. The first test came on a cold morning in early winter when a neighbor rode up to the farmhouse. Farrah was in the barn mucking out stalls when she heard the horse, and she froze, her hand going instinctively to where her sword would normally hang. But Quinlan had asked her to go unarmed when working the farm, to avoid alarming any visitors, and so she was defenseless as she heard voices outside. She moved to the barn door and peered out carefully. The visitor was a man of middle years, weathered and suspicious, sitting astride a gray gelding. Quinlan stood in the yard talking to him, his posture relaxed, but his voice too quiet for her to make out the words. Then the neighbor's gaze shifted and found her in the doorway, and his expression went from suspicion to shock to anger in rapid succession. "You have an orc on your land," he said loudly. "Ashford, have you lost your mind?" "That is Farrah," Quinlan replied calmly. "She is my partner in running this farm." "Partner?" The man's voice rose. "She is a monster. You cannot possibly think to harbor her here. What will the village say?" "I care more about what I know to be true than what the village might say." Quinlan's voice had taken on an edge now, quiet but firm. "Farrah has done nothing but help me make this farm more prosperous. She is honest and hardworking and has more honor than most humans I have met. If the village has a problem with that, they can take it up with me directly." The neighbor stared at him as if he had grown a second head. "This will not stand, Ashford. Mark my words, people will talk, and when they do, you will both pay the price." He wheeled his horse around and galloped off, leaving a cloud of dust in his wake. Farrah emerged from the barn, her stomach tight with anxiety. "He will spread word," she said quietly. "You will face consequences for harboring me. Let him talk." Quinlan turned to her, and his expression was fierce in a way she had not seen before. "I meant what I said, Farrah. You belong here. Whatever comes, we will face it together." She wanted to believe him, but she had lived too long as an outsider to trust that acceptance would come easily. Still, she nodded and returned to her work, trying to ignore the knot of dread that had formed in her chest. The neighbor's visit had consequences, just as Farrah had feared. Over the following weeks, fewer traders came by the farm, and when they did, they were curt and unfriendly. Someone threw a rock through the kitchen window one night, and they woke to find crude symbols painted on the barn door. Quinlan cleaned them away without comment and replaced the window, but Farrah could see the toll it was taking on him. "I should leave," she said one evening as they sat by the fire. "This will only get worse." "No." The word was flat and final. "They are testing us, seeing if their disapproval will be enough to make us comply. If we give in now, we teach them that intimidation works. And if we do not give in, what then? Will you risk losing everything you have built here for my sake?" Quinlan set down the leather strap he had been mending and turned to face her fully. "I am not losing anything. I am gaining a life that actually matters. Before you came, I existed here. I worked and ate and slept, and the days blurred together into nothing. Now I wake up with purpose. I share my meals with someone who makes me laugh. I go to bed each night grateful for the day I had. That is not nothing, Farrah. That is everything." Tears pricked at her eyes, a weakness she rarely allowed herself, but she blinked them back. "You see too much good in me. I see you exactly as you are, strong and fierce and kind beneath that warrior exterior. You think I do not notice how gently you handle the chickens, or the way you always offer to take the heavier load, or how you stayed up all night when the milk cow was sick." He moved closer until he was kneeling before her chair, looking up into her face. "I see you, Farrah Algren. Every part of you, and I am not afraid." She reached out with one shaking hand and touched his cheek, marveling at the softness of human skin, the warmth of him. "I do not deserve you," she whispered. "Then we are matched, because I do not deserve you either. But here we are anyway, and I would not have it any other way." He leaned into her touch, and the moment stretched between them, heavy with words unspoken. Farrah knew she was standing on a precipice. She could pull back now, maintain the careful distance of partnership and friendship, or she could step forward into unknown territory that terrified her more than any battle. She thought of her mother's words about strength and kindness, about honor meaning more than just prowess in combat. She thought about what she wanted, truly wanted for the first time in her life. "Quinlan," she said softly, "I need to tell you something. I am listening. When I first came here, I was running from duty and honor that had been twisted into something unrecognizable. I thought I had lost everything that mattered. But then you took me in, this strange human who saw me as a person rather than a threat. You asked for nothing except my company. You made me feel like I belonged somewhere again." She paused, gathering her courage. "What I am trying to say, and doing poorly, is that I have fallen in love with you. I know it is foolish and impossible, that I am orc and you are human and the world will never accept us. But I cannot keep pretending that what I feel is merely friendship or gratitude. It is more, so much more, and I needed you to know even if it ruins everything." The silence that followed felt like an eternity. Quinlan's eyes had gone very wide, and Farrah braced herself for rejection, for the careful explanation of why this could never work. Instead, he let out a shaky laugh and pressed his forehead against her knee. "Thank the gods," he said, his voice muffled. "I have been trying to work up the courage to tell you the same thing for weeks now." Her heart stuttered. "You have." He looked up at her, and the emotion in his eyes made her breath catch. "Since the day you helped me fix the plow and laughed when you got covered in mud, maybe even before that. I love you, Farrah. I love your strength and your honor and the way you challenge me to be better. I love how you take up space without apologizing for it. I love the sound of your voice and the way you tilt your head when you are thinking. I love you, and I do not care what anyone else thinks about it." She pulled him up from the floor and into her arms, holding him against her chest, feeling his heartbeat against hers. He wrapped his arms around her as much as he could, pressing his face into the crook of her neck, and she felt the wetness of tears, his or hers. She could not tell. "This will not be easy," she said into his hair. "No," he agreed, "but anything worth having rarely is." They held each other until the fire burned low, and when they finally pulled apart, Quinlan cupped her face in his hands and kissed her. It was awkward at first, navigating the difference in their physiology, but they found a rhythm that worked, and Farrah felt like something inside her that had been frozen for years was finally thawing. That night she moved her few belongings into his room in the loft, and they lay together in the darkness, talking and planning and simply being together. The world beyond the farm might be hostile, but here, in this small space they had carved out, they were safe and loved and whole. Winter settled over the land in earnest, bringing deep snows that isolated the farm from the outside world. Farrah found she did not mind the isolation. She and Quinlan worked together to care for the animals and maintain the buildings, and spent the long evenings by the fire. She taught him some of the orc language, laughing at his pronunciation, and he taught her to read the common script, patient with her struggles. They talked about the future more concretely now. Quinlan wanted to expand the farm, perhaps add a few more cows and some pigs. Farrah suggested defensive improvements, subtle things that would make the property more secure without looking like a fortress. They spoke carefully around the question of children, neither quite ready to address that complexity, but the conversations themselves felt like promises of a shared life ahead. "You ever regret it?" Farrah asked one night as they lay tangled together in bed. "Taking me in?" "The trouble it has brought you." Quinlan traced idle patterns on her arm, his touch sending pleasant shivers through her. "Never," he said firmly. "You are the best thing that has ever happened to me. Whatever consequences come from that, I accept gladly." She kissed him then, pouring all her gratitude and love into the gesture, and he responded with equal fervor. They made love slowly, learning each other's bodies, finding what brought pleasure despite their differences. It was tender and awkward and perfect, and afterward Farrah felt more complete than she ever had. The deep winter was peaceful, but as the snows began to melt and the first hints of spring appeared, the outside world intruded again. A group of men from the village rode up one morning, 6 of them armed with staffs and stern expressions. Quinlan met them in the yard while Farrah watched from the barn, her sword now strapped to her back. "Ashford," the leader said, a burly man with a thick beard. "We have come to talk sense into you. This situation with the orc cannot continue. Her name is Farrah, and she is my partner and my love. There is no situation to discuss." Quinlan's voice was steady, but Farrah could see the tension in his shoulders. "You cannot mean to keep her here. It is unnatural, an abomination." "What is unnatural is judging someone based on what they are rather than who they are. Farrah has done nothing to any of you. She works hard, causes no trouble, and asks only to be left in peace. Why is that so threatening? Because she is orc." The bearded man spat into the mud. "They are monsters, killers, our enemies. You dishonor your ancestors by taking one as a lover." Farrah had heard enough. She strode out of the barn, her full height and breadth on display, and the men shifted nervously. "I am those things you say," she announced, her voice carrying across the yard. "I am orc. I have killed, though only in battle or self-defense, but I am also a person who loves and works and dreams of a peaceful life. If that makes me a monster in your eyes, then you are using a very narrow definition." "Stay out of this, creature," the bearded man snarled. This is between us and Ashford." "No." Quinlan moved to stand beside her, taking her hand in his. "Anything you have to say to her, you say to both of us. We are together in this, in everything." The men exchanged uncertain glances, clearly not having expected such unity. Finally, the bearded man said, "The village has decided. Either the orc leaves, or you will be cut off from all trade and support. We will not do business with someone who consorts with monsters. Your crops will rot before we buy them. Your goods will go unsold. You will be isolated and ruined. Then I will be isolated and ruined with the woman I love." Quinlan's voice was quiet but implacable. "I understand you cannot see past your prejudice, but that is your failing, not ours. We will manage without the village. You are a fool, Ashford. This will destroy you." "The only thing that would destroy me is betraying the person I love to please people who value conformity over compassion. If that makes me a fool, so be it." He squeezed Farrah's hand. "Now please leave our land." The men left, muttering among themselves, and Farrah felt her heart simultaneously soar and sink. Quinlan had chosen her, had stood against his entire community for her sake, but the price would be steep. They could not run a farm without trade, without the ability to sell their harvest and buy necessary supplies. "We will find a way," Quinlan said, as if reading her thoughts. "There are other villages, other markets. It will be harder, but we will manage." Over the following weeks, they proved the bearded man right. No one from the village would trade with them. The blacksmith refused to repair their tools. The miller would not grind their grain. They were cut off as completely as if they had been struck from a map. But Quinlan was resourceful, and Farrah was nothing if not stubborn. They traveled to more distant settlements, places where Quinlan was unknown and Farrah could wait hidden while he conducted business. It was exhausting and inefficient, but they made it work. Spring planting came, and they worked from dawn to dusk getting the seeds into the ground. Farrah's strength was invaluable, allowing them to accomplish in days what would have taken Quinlan weeks alone. Despite the hardship, there were moments of joy. The first green shoots breaking through the soil, a spectacular sunset that painted the sky in shades of rose and gold, quiet evenings when they were too tired to do anything but hold each other and be grateful for survival. It was during the planting season that Quinlan's sister arrived. Farrah was in the field when she heard a wagon approaching and looked up to see a woman with Quinlan's dark hair and kind eyes climbing down. Behind her came two small children, a boy and a girl, both staring around with wide eyes. "Quinn," the woman called, and Quinlan dropped his hoe and ran to embrace her. "Elara, what are you doing here?" His surprise was evident, and Farrah felt a spike of anxiety. This was his family, the last connection he had to the life he had known before her. What would this sister think of her? "We heard rumors in the village about what was happening here," Elara said, pulling back to look at her brother's face. "About the trouble you were facing. I had to come see for myself if you were all right." Quinlan glanced back at Farrah, who had moved closer but remained a wary distance away. "I am more than all right," he said. "Elara, I would like you to meet Farrah Algrun. She is my partner and the woman I love." Elara's eyes widened as she took in Farrah's full appearance, the green skin and tusks and obvious orc heritage. For a long moment she said nothing, and Farrah braced herself for rejection. Then Elara smiled, warm and genuine, and said, "Well met, Farrah. Any woman who can make my brother look as happy as he does right now is welcome in my family." The relief was almost dizzying. Farrah found herself returning the smile, awkward with the unfamiliar expression. "Well met, Elara." The children, emboldened by their mother's acceptance, crept closer. The girl, who could not have been more than 6, stared up at Farrah with fascination rather than fear. "Are you really an orc?" she asked. "I am," Farrah confirmed. "You are very tall. Are all orcs that tall?" "Most are, yes." "Can you lift a whole cow?" Farrah laughed, the sound rough but genuine. "I have never tried, but perhaps. Would you like to see me lift something else?" She hoisted a full sack of seed grain over her head with one arm, and the children gasped in delight. The boy clapped his hands, and even Alara looked impressed. Quinlan was grinning, clearly pleased by his sister's acceptance. They spent the rest of the day together, and Alara proved to be as kind as her brother, asking Farrah questions about her life and listening with genuine interest to the answers. She helped prepare the evening meal, and they all ate together around the table that suddenly felt full in the best possible way. The children peppered Farrah with more questions, their innocent curiosity a balm after so much hostility. That night, after the children were asleep in the storage room Farrah had once occupied, Alara sat with her brother and Farrah by the fire. "I want you to know that I am proud of you, Quinn," she said quietly. "It takes courage to love someone the world tells you not to love. You have always had a good heart, but I have never seen you this happy. That tells me everything I need to know about Farrah." "Thank you," Quinlan said, his voice thick with emotion. "That means more than you know." Alara turned to Farrah. "I also want to apologize on behalf of those who have treated you badly. Not all humans are as closed-minded as the fools in that village. Some of us understand that character matters more than species." "Your acceptance is a gift," Farrah replied. "One I will treasure." Before Alara left the next morning, she pressed a purse of coins into Quinlan's hand. "For supplies," she said. "And I will spread the word among those I know who might be willing to trade with you. You are not as alone as you think." As Farrah watched the wagon disappear down the road, she felt something like hope taking root. Perhaps they could build a life here after all. Perhaps love and determination were enough. The crops grew strong through the summer, and Quinlan and Farrah worked tirelessly to tend them. True to her word, Alara sent word of a few traders willing to do business despite the village's boycott. They were able to acquire the supplies they needed, though at higher prices due to the increased travel. Still, they managed, and the farm began to prosper in ways it never had when Quinlan worked it alone. Other changes came too. A traveling merchant stopped by one day, an older man who took one look at Farrah and smiled. "First time I have seen an orc this far south in years," he said amiably. "Name is Garrett Dunsworth. I trade up and down the frontier, and I can always use another stop on my route if you folks are interested." They were very interested, and Garrett became a regular visitor, bringing news from other settlements along with goods. Through him, they learned of other mixed couples like themselves, humans and orcs who had found each other and were trying to build lives against the tide of prejudice. The knowledge that they were not alone in their struggle was powerfully reassuring. As autumn approached and the harvest began, Farrah and Quinlan worked side by side cutting grain and gathering vegetables. The yield was exceptional, more than enough to see them through the winter with surplus to sell. They celebrated by cooking a feast and inviting Garrett, who happened to be passing through, to join them. "You two have something special here," Garrett observed over roasted chicken and fresh bread. "I have seen a lot of farms in my time, and this one has the feel of a place that is loved. That is worth more than any amount of gold." "We have been fortunate," Quinlan said, glancing at Farrah with warmth in his eyes. "Fortunate in each other, certainly, but also smart. You have made a good partnership, and it shows in the quality of your work." Garrett raised his cup. "To Quinlan and Farrah, may your fields be fertile and your love endure." They drank to that, and Farrah felt a contentment settle over her that she had not known was possible. This life they were building, it was not easy, but it was theirs. No one could take that away. The second winter was easier than the first. They had more supplies, better preparation, and the comfort of knowing they could weather the isolation together. They spent the cold months planning for the spring, talking about adding a new barn and perhaps acquiring a few sheep. Quinlan taught Farrah to play the flute, laughing at her fumbling attempts, and she taught him basic sword forms that left him breathless but grinning. "I never thought I would say this," he admitted one evening as they practiced in the barn, "but I am actually starting to understand why you find this satisfying. There is an elegance to it when done properly." "You have decent form for a farmer," Farrah teased. "Give it a few more years and you might even be competent." He lunged at her playfully, and she caught him easily, pulling him close for a kiss. "I love you," he murmured against her lips. "And I love you," she replied. "More than I thought possible." As winter gave way to spring, they received unexpected news. Garrett arrived with a letter from Alara, and Quinlan read it aloud while Farrah listened. His sister had been speaking to people in her own village, sharing the story of Quinlan and Farrah's relationship and challenging the prejudices she encountered. Slowly, attitudes were beginning to shift. A few families had expressed interest in meeting Farrah, in seeing for themselves that orcs were not the monsters they had been taught to fear. "She wants to know if we would be willing to host a gathering here," Quinlan said, looking up from the letter. "A chance for people to meet you in a safe, neutral setting. No pressure, no expectations, just an opportunity for understanding." Farrah's first instinct was to refuse. The thought of being on display, of having to prove her worthiness to strangers, made her skin crawl. But then she thought about what Quinlan had given up for her, the isolation he had endured without complaint. If there was a chance to make things easier, to build bridges instead of walls, did she not owe it to him to try? "If you think it is a good idea, I am willing," she said finally. Quinlan set down the letter and took her hands. "I only think it is a good idea if you are comfortable with it. I will not ask you to endure scrutiny for my sake." "You have endured so much for mine," she pointed out. "If this gathering can help even a few people see beyond their prejudice, it is worth the discomfort." They sent word back to Alara, and plans were made for a gathering in late spring after the planting was done. Farrah found herself both nervous and determined. She had faced down enemies in battle without flinching, but the thought of facing potential friends was somehow more daunting. The day of the gathering arrived warm and bright, with the smell of apple blossoms on the breeze. Alara arrived early with her family, along with 3 other families she had convinced to make the journey. They were wary but polite, and Farrah made an effort to be welcoming despite her nerves. Quinlan had prepared a meal, and they all sat around a long table set up outside, eating and talking. The children were the easiest, their natural curiosity overcoming any learned prejudice. They asked Farrah about orc customs and weapons and stories, and she found herself relaxing as she answered. The adults were more reserved, but as the afternoon wore on, barriers began to lower. One woman, a weaver named Cassandra, spoke quietly to Farrah as they helped clear the table. "I want to apologize," she said. "I have thought terrible things about orcs all my life, believed the stories without questioning them. But seeing you here, seeing how you and Quinlan are together, it has made me reconsider. You are not what I expected." "What did you expect?" Farrah asked, genuinely curious. "A monster, a brute, someone violent and cruel." Cassandra looked down at her hands. "But you are gentle with the children, and the way you look at Quinlan, there is so much love there. It has made me ashamed of my prejudice." "Thank you for your honesty," Farrah said. "It takes courage to admit when we have been wrong." "Not as much courage as it takes to live the life you and Quinlan have chosen. I hope you know that there are those of us who support you, even if we have been silent until now." The gathering ended with tentative smiles and promises to visit again. As the families departed, Farrah felt cautiously optimistic. Change would not come quickly, but perhaps it could come at all. The seasons turned and life continued. More people began to visit the farm, drawn by curiosity or genuine interest in connecting. Not everyone was accepting, and there were still incidents of hostility, but slowly, a network of support began to form. Farrah and Quinlan were no longer quite so isolated, and the farm continued to thrive. It was in the third autumn of their time together that Quinlan brought up the subject they had been carefully avoiding. They were sitting by the fire after a long day of harvest work, comfortable in the silence, when he said, "I have been thinking about the future." "As have I," Farrah replied. "We have built something good here. A home, a life, a community of sorts, but I find myself wanting to make it more permanent, more official." He turned to look at her, his expression vulnerable. "I want to marry you, Farrah. I want to stand before whoever will witness it and declare that I choose you today and every day for as long as we both live." Her breath caught. Marriage. It was not a concept that translated directly to orc culture, where partnerships were often informal and based on mutual commitment rather than ceremony. But she understood what he was asking, the depth of promise he wanted to make. "There is no priest who would perform such a ceremony," she said carefully. "No official who would recognize such a union. Then we will make our own ceremony. We will speak our vows to each other before the people who matter to us, and that will be enough. I do not need the approval of church or state to know that I belong to you and you to me." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. Inside were 2 rings, simple bands carved from dark wood and polished smooth. "I made these. One for you, one for me. They are not fancy, but they are made with my own hands and all the love I have for you." Farrah took the larger ring, the one clearly made to fit her thick finger, and felt tears prick her eyes for the second time since she had known him. "You honor me beyond measure," she said, her voice rough with emotion. "Yes, Quinlan Ashford, I will marry you in whatever way we can, and I will cherish you for as long as breath remains in my body." They planned the ceremony for the following month, at the height of autumn when the trees blazed with color. Alara came with her family, and Garrett made a special trip to attend. A handful of the more accepting neighbors arrived as well, curious and supportive in equal measure. They gathered in the farmyard, and Quinlan and Farrah stood facing each other, hands clasped. Quinlan spoke first, his voice clear and strong. "Farrah Algrun, when you came into my life, you were running from a world that tried to break you, but you did not break. You stood strong, and in your strength I found inspiration. You taught me that love is not about comfort or ease, but about choosing to stand beside someone even when the world says you should not. I choose you, today and always. I vow to work beside you, to support you, to love you through whatever challenges come. You are my partner, my heart, my home." Farrah had to swallow hard before she could speak, but when she did, her words rang with conviction. "Quinlan Ashford, you saw me when no one else would look. You offered kindness when I expected hatred, acceptance when I braced for rejection. You taught me that home is not a place but a person, and that love can be stronger than prejudice. I choose you, today and always. I vow to protect you, to cherish you, to stand beside you as an equal and a partner. You are my heart, my peace, my home." They exchanged rings, slipping them onto each other's fingers, and then Quinlan pulled her down for a kiss while their small gathering cheered. It was not a traditional wedding, not recognized by any official authority, but it was real and binding in all the ways that mattered. That night, they celebrated with food and music, Garrett pulling out a fiddle and playing lively tunes while the children danced. Farrah felt a profound sense of belonging. surrounded by people who accepted her not despite her orc heritage but including it. She caught Quinlan's eye across the fire, and he smiled at her, that warm, genuine expression that still made her heart skip even after 3 years together. As the gathering wound down and guests departed, Farrah and Quinlan stood in their yard, looking up at the stars that sparkled overhead. "We did it," Quinlan said softly. "We built something real." "We did," Farrah agreed. "And we will continue to build it day by day for as long as we are able." They returned to the farmhouse hand in hand, ready to begin their marriage as they had begun their partnership. With commitment, with love, and with the fierce determination to make a life together against all odds. The years that followed were not without their challenges. There were still incidents of prejudice, still people who refused to accept their relationship. But there were also victories, small and large. More mixed couples began to emerge from the shadows, emboldened by the example Farrah and Quinlan had set. Laws began to slowly shift as more people questioned the old prejudices. Change was glacial, but it was change nonetheless. The farm continued to prosper, and they expanded it gradually, adding the sheep they had planned and a second field for rotating crops. Garrett brought news of a young orc man who had fallen in love with a human woman, and they traveled to offer support and advice. Seeing others follow the path they had forged filled Farrah with a pride she had never experienced in battle. Alara's children grew, and they spent summers at the farm, learning to work the land and treating Farrah as a beloved aunt. The boy, Marcus, developed a particular fascination with orc fighting styles, and Farrah taught him patiently, careful to emphasize discipline and honor over aggression. The girl, Lydia, loved to hear stories of Farrah's time with her clan, and Farrah found herself sharing memories she had long suppressed, finding healing in the telling. 5 years into their marriage, Farrah received word that shook her to her core. A messenger arrived, a young orc woman who had traveled far to find her. She brought news that Farrah's former clan chief had died, and the new leadership wanted to reach out to her. They had heard stories of her life among the humans, of the bridges she had built, and they wanted to learn from her example. Would she be willing to meet with a delegation? Farrah discussed it long into the night with Quinlan, torn between hope and fear. What if it is a trap? She worried. What if they only want to punish me for leaving? Then we will face it together, Quinlan said firmly. But I think you should at least hear what they have to say. This could be a chance to heal old wounds. She agreed to a meeting, and a month later, 3 orc warriors arrived at the farm. Farrah met them in the yard, Quinlan at her side, and felt her breath catch as she recognized one of them, Garth, who had trained beside her as a youth. "Farrah," he said, his voice grave, "it has been too long." "It has," she agreed warily. "Why have you come?" "To apologize," said the eldest of the 3, a grizzled warrior with scars crossing his face. "The old chief's actions brought shame to our clan. He should have honored your integrity, not punished it. The new chief, his daughter, wants to make amends. She asks if you would consider returning, not as an exile but as an honored member. Your skills and your wisdom are needed." Farrah felt Quinlan's hand tighten on hers, and she squeezed back reassuringly. "I am honored by the offer," she said carefully, "but my life is here now. I have built a home, taken a husband, made commitments I will not break. I cannot return to the clan, not permanently." The eldest warrior nodded as if he had expected this answer. "Then the chief asks if you would serve as an ambassador of sorts, to help build understanding between our peoples. To teach others the lessons you have learned about cooperation and acceptance." "That I could do," Farrah said slowly. "Not often and not at the cost of my life here, but I could visit, could share what I have learned if it would help bring peace." They discussed the details, and by the time the delegation left, A tentative agreement had been reached. Farrah would travel to the clan lands once per season, staying for a few weeks to teach and advise. In return, the clan would open trade relations with human settlements, beginning with the network Garrett had established. "You are going to change the world," Quinlan said that night as they lay in bed. "We are going to change it," Farrah corrected. "This was only possible because you stood beside me when no one else would. Because you showed me that love could transcend the boundaries others tried to impose." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, and she felt the truth of her words settle deep in her bones. They had started with a simple act of kindness, with a man offering shelter to a desperate stranger. From that small seed had grown something larger than either of them could have imagined. A life filled with love, a bridge between two peoples, and hope for a better future. Over the following years, Farrah made her journeys to the clan lands, bringing Quinlan with her when he could be spared from the farm. She taught young warriors about human customs and helped negotiate trade agreements. She mediated disputes and shared stories of her life with Quinlan, offering living proof that cooperation was possible. Slowly, painfully, relationships between humans and orcs began to improve. The farm remained their anchor, the place they returned to between journeys, the home they had built together. They added a workshop where Quinlan could practice carpentry in the winters, and a dedicated training ground where Farrah could maintain her skills. Garrett became a permanent fixture, storing goods in their barn and bringing news from across the frontier. In their 10th year together, Alara brought stunning news. The regional governor, inspired by the changes he had witnessed, was officially recognizing marriages between humans and orcs. It was a small step, limited to their province, but it meant that Farrah and Quinlan's union would finally have legal standing. "We should have a proper ceremony," Alara insisted. "Something official with witnesses and documents," but Quinlan shook his head. "The ceremony we had was proper. It was honest and heartfelt, and it bound us together in the ways that matter most. I do not need a piece of paper to know that Farrah is my wife. Nor do I need official recognition to know that Quinlan is my husband," Farrah agreed. "But we will register the marriage, for the practical benefits it brings. And perhaps it will make things easier for others who follow in our footsteps." They made the trip to the provincial capital, a journey of several days, and stood before an official who looked deeply uncomfortable but processed their paperwork nonetheless. Walking out of that building with a marriage certificate felt surreal, making official what had been real in their hearts for a decade. The farm continued to prosper, and they eventually took on a young apprentice, a half-orc boy whose human mother had died, and whose orc father wanted a better life for him than the harsh clan structure could provide. His name was Thomas, and he was quiet and hardworking, soaking up everything they taught him about farming and life and the importance of integrity. "You are good with him," Quinlan observed one evening as they watched Thomas carefully tending to the vegetable garden. "He reminds me of myself at that age," Farrah replied. "Caught between two worlds, belonging fully to neither. I want him to know that he can make his own place, that he does not have to choose one heritage over the other." Thomas became like a son to them, filling a space neither had quite acknowledged was empty. He grew strong and capable, and when he came of age, he chose to stay at the farm, taking over many of the daily tasks and allowing Farrah and Quinlan more time for their ambassadorial work. The years turned and they grew older together. Quinlan's hair went gray at the temples, and Farrah's strength, while still formidable, began to show the first signs of age. But their love only deepened, tempered by time and challenge into something unbreakable. They were sitting on the porch one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant shades when Quinlan said, "Do you ever regret it? The life you could have had if you had never met me." Farrah looked at him, at the dear, familiar face she had woken beside for 20 years, and felt a surge of fierce affection. "Never," she said firmly. "The life I could have, it would have been a half-life, defined by duty and violence. The life we have built together, it is full and rich and meaningful. I regret nothing." "Neither do I," Quinlan said softly. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Farrah Algrun, then, now, and always." She leaned over and kissed him, gentle and sure, and thought about how far they had come from that first desperate meeting in the wheat field. She had offered him her sword, the only thing of value she thought she possessed, and he had asked instead for her presence at his table. That simple choice had changed everything. They sat together as the stars came out, hand in hand, surrounded by the land they had worked and the life they had built. Inside, Thomas was preparing dinner, the smell of cooking wafting through the open door. In the barn, the animals were settling for the night. Across the frontier, couples like them were building their own homes, following the path that had been forged by a desperate orc woman and a kind human farmer who had chosen love over fear. The world was still not perfect. Prejudice still existed, and there were places where their kind of love was still forbidden. But change had begun, small and steady, like seeds pushing up through soil. And at the center of it all was a simple truth, that love, when given freely and without condition, could transform everything it touched. Farrah tightened her grip on Quinlan's hand, feeling the wooden ring on his finger press against her own, and smiled. They had built something beautiful together, something lasting. And as the night deepened around them and the first cool breeze of autumn whispered through the fields, she knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, home.